Okay. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today. And I wanted to welcome Stephanie Shepard. She is a longtime friend and colleague in the state of Iowa. We're really pleased she was able to be here in person in November for a statewide naturalist meeting at the Dorothy Pico Nature Center in Sioux City. And have been roaming the state in many ways. You may have been in contact with her with any of the state wildlife monitoring programs, such as the frog and toad surveys or the bald eagle surveys or other types of things. She is a wildlife biologist within the Iowa's Wildlife Diversity Program for the Iowa DNR, Department of Natural Resource. And she just recently celebrated 16 years with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. She works on all species classified as non-game in all parts of Iowa, but her special interests are in pollinators and prairies. So we're excited she's going to share her passion with us today, a little bit more about conservations and conserving species in urban spaces, especially bumblebees in the city. So I'm going to let Stephanie take it away, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm gonna get a slideshow up here. Hopefully everybody can hear me just fine. Okay, hopefully everybody, I'm sharing my program now and hopefully you can see the slides. As Dawn said, my name's Stephanie Shepard and I'm really excited to talk to this group because y'all are definitely my people. I love not only prairies and native plants. I also like recently in the last couple of years bought a small acreage that I am mostly, through wanting to be able to steward a small piece of land, and I love gardening, and of course I'm adding a lot of native plants to my area, and with the idea of providing a refuge for wildlife. So this is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. So to give you a heads up, like the program is kind of divided into two different pieces. So this first part of the program, I'm going to focus on sort of some conservation practices that we can do in city environments, or things that how important cities are actually to conservation and how they can operate as conservation spaces. And then we'll take a break for any questions and answers. And then the second half is really a straight up introduction to bumblebees, how to identify them and stuff that will hopefully at least give you a general foundation in bumblebee biology and ecology, at least for here in Iowa. Okay, so cities have always been, for wildlife biologists like myself, have really been all about this. We have really dismissed them as being something that's important to wildlife. We have thought of them as mostly being devoid of any kind of healthy wildlife populations, and that if they are anything, if there's wildlife there, that they are serving as sinks, and that they're not really providing quality wildlife habitat. Not to mention that, of course, there's a lot of people in cities, and you bring people and wildlife together, and sometimes that doesn't go very smoothly and can cause problems. So we've kind of, I think, mostly avoided working in cities or thinking about cities as conservation spaces. We need to remember that cities can also look like this. I think I saw Jim on this program. This is his front yard in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Gorgeous, full of native plants. And, there's a lot of potential in cities to provide, to actually build habitat and have more natural systems. And while it's never going to be, a comfortable home for many species of wildlife, there are a lot of species of wildlife where it's increasingly obvious that cities are decent places for certain kinds of wildlife. So for example, a lot of the work and the more we learn about insects has really made a case for why cities are ecologically important to some of these species, and especially our pollinators. Some studies have indicated that pollination rates are higher in urban areas, probably because of how the landscape is laid out. Urban gardens can produce massive amounts of bee food. One study in the UK found that an average urban garden in London produced the equivalent in, human equivalent in bee food of 700,000 pounds of food for bees. So just immense potential to produce good quality nutrition for a lot of these species. And then also we're finding that we routinely find rare species of insects in urban habitats. And sort of my first experience with this was with this little lady. This is a female worker, Rusty-patched Bumblebee. It is an endangered species. It was the first federally endangered bumblebee species in the country. And their distribution comes into Iowa, kind of the northeast third of the state, basically, a little bit more than that. And what you're looking at here is my little native garden at my old place. I used to live in a house in the middle of Boone, Iowa, 2 blocks from downtown, from Main Street. And it was a completely shaded yard, except for this one little strip that got some sun. So I planted some prairie plants here. You can see butterfly milkweed and swamp milkweed and hoary vervain are all blooming. And this was in 2018, and during this summer we had just started doing some status surveys for this Rusty-patched Bumblebee to get a better feel for its distribution in the state and if it occurred in the same places, in the most recent records. So I had spent all day at that point, the furthermost west recent records of the species was in Iowa City area, so Johnson County. So I had spent the day wandering around Johnson County looking for Rusty-patched Bumblebee, and came home and it was like 8 o'clock at night, and I wandered outside to put something in the trash can, and started wandering around my yard as you do, and came over to my little prairie strip to check it out, and there was a bumblebee on the butterfly milkweed, and I bent down and took a closer look at it and was like, oh my gosh, and completely freaked out that it was a Rusty-patched Bumblebee. I was pretty sure of it. Of course, I freaked out and the bumblebee flew off immediately, scared for its life. But the next day I was able to be calm and confirm and get confirmation that it was in fact a Rusty-patched Bumblebee. This was the first time the bumblebee had been seen in Boone County since the 1960s. It expanded the known recent range of the species, 120 miles to the west. So it was a huge find. And since then, it's also been found in Ames. And, this was in my tiny little prairie strip. I had just planted these plants earlier this, in the spring of this year, 2 blocks from downtown Boone. And, lest you think my experience was unusual, this is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service map of the Rusty-patched Bumblebee distribution. And hopefully looking at this, you immediately notice that all those red blobs are kind of center on records. And where are they? They're in urban areas. We have found an incredibly large number of Rusty-patched Bumblebee records in urban areas. And some of this may be just that there's, people and they're seeing Rusty-patch, there's more, there's a bias towards being able to report the species with more eyes out there looking, but this is definitely a real distribution as well. Some of it may be related to Rusty-patched Bumblebees seem to like riparian habitat or habitat along rivers. And of course, a lot of our cities are built along rivers. But regardless, Rusty-patched Bumblebees are living in our cities. So this video that is hopefully coming up and you're seeing right now is of a Rusty-patched Bumblebee nest in a Minneapolis house. thankfully this landowner was, this homeowner was okay with a endangered species nesting in their, foundation. But, it brings up the question, since we're finding the species and lots of bumblebees in cities, kind of why do they live here? What do cities provide for them? So cities provide a lot of food. Bumblebees are looking for nectar and pollen of flowering plants, and people also love flowers. So we plant lots of flowers in our yards and therefore are providing food for these species. Nesting sites, they're looking for holes, they're looking for bare ground, they're looking for piles, like a pile of cement or a wood pile are all excellent, places and for them to nest. And, urban areas have plenty of these types of habitats. There's also, they're looking for more wooded areas for wintering locations, which, many cities have a lot of trees and a lot of, very wooded neighborhoods that sort of mimic a woodland. But they also have this mix of sort of open and wooded habitat, which bumblebees most naturally occur in. And then, bumblebees and insects in general, a lot of our pollinators, they can fly and utilize, they don't need huge, large, intact areas of habitat necessarily. They can utilize these fragmented habitats that we get in cities. So, that's kind of why cities can actually be important for insects. So, let's step back a little bit and talk about kind of get into the mindset of a city administrator. Why should a city administrator care about this? Why do cities need nature? And of course, some of the biggest arguments for this is the environment and the great benefits to the environment having lots of pollinator habitat and natural habitat brings. So for example, street trees, and these are just the street trees, the ones in between the sidewalk and the street, can reduce fine particulate matter from between 1 and 10 micrograms per cubic meter. They can also reduce the temperatures in a city from 1 to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which during the summertime can make a big difference and lower heating costs and et cetera. Urban landscapes shed rain like crazy. It carries sediment and chemicals with it. And of course, cities are always, one of the biggest systems they manage is that stormwater system. And more natural plantings can help mitigate the amount of water that's running off the landscape and really take some pressure off of those stormwater systems. And then finally, while it's maybe not a direct benefit to the city, cities are incredibly, huge producers of carbon. And having more natural areas within the city helps to store some of that carbon and be an offset for what cities are contributing to the environment. There's also, of course, increasing, recognition that nature is really important for our mental health. I mean, when you get right down to it, nature doesn't need us. It doesn't need people, but we desperately need nature. And, not just in a, like, we need to breathe and need water and stuff, sort of, survival, but also for our mental and physical health. So of course, there's the physical health with the environmental things like fewer chemicals, clean air, clean water, the ability to get some outdoor exercise in a nice environment. There's also the mental health, increasing evidence that a lack of nature can cause mental distress. We just saw huge examples of this, or we have continued to see huge examples of this with this pandemic. And, people being able to get outside has been, one of the saving graces of people. And having embedded nature in a city is important for citizens. Not everybody can jump in a car and go drive out to a state park out in the countryside nearby. And so making sure that we provide nature and the ability to experience nature within a city is really important to make sure that that the entire citizenry can take advantage of that. And then there's, of course, like folks' hobbies. One of the main things is birds. People, I don't know if you're aware of this, maybe you're one of these people, really, really love birds. They love feeding birds. They love watching birds. It's a huge, it brings huge joy to many people's lives. And so being able to do that, provide habitat for these animals and be able to watch them, in your neighborhood, in your yard, is really important for a lot of people. And then there's also, while it's not going to revolutionize a city's budget, having more natural landscapes really can impact and have a little bit of cost savings in them. Some examples of this is maintaining lawn. There has been a number of studies lately that have talked about the amount of money that goes into maintaining a lawn. And so transitioning away from that can really actually save time and money on the city's budget. Again, that stormwater infrastructure and flooding, being able to have some more natural areas to take care of some of that excess water, takes pressure off of that stormwater infrastructure and can save the city the chance of flooding, but also, money related to cleaning up after that, as well as in maintaining their stormwater infrastructure. And then some other examples is the use of chemicals to spray for mosquitoes, for example, or for weeds. Changing up the way we manage some of the city properties so that there's less chemical usage, as well as, allowing citizens of the city to grow more natural landscapes and therefore use less herbicide and pesticide is going to be beneficial to the city budget. Okay. So hopefully I've convinced you, and I'm pretty sure this group was already on board with this, that, cities need nature, and nature can take advantage of good habitats within cities. So here's some concrete examples of ways for a city to be more pollinator friendly, and how sort of a group like this can help, or any kind of group can really help and support a city to be more bumblebee friendly, if you will. And I gave a modified version of this talk, or a sort of one aimed at city leaders to the League of Cities conference, and had a pretty full room of city administrators that are all interested in doing this, but they have a lot of barriers to doing it. So I think anything that groups can do to support their city leaders and to help them with this, especially when there is interest, is really important. So first of all, why bumblebees? Why am I talking about bumblebees? And, I don't mean to suggest that only, this type of work can only impact bumblebees in a good way, but bumblebees are sort of a good gateway, I think, to people thinking about insects. They're kind of a natural denizen of suburban, some urban spaces, as we've kind of talked about. There are multiple species of bumblebee, but there's not too many. So there's some interest there, there's some diversity there, but we have about 15-ish species in Iowa, and there's probably only about 7 or 8 that are really common. So they're very doable for people to learn and people to recognize. And so that's a benefit. There's also some good resources for ID available. There's a conservation need. We've already talked about the Rusty-patched Bumblebee, which is federally endangered, but there's a couple of other species that occur in Iowa that have been petitioned for federal listing. And in general, pollinators are really struggling at the moment. Bumblebees are not aggressive. This is something that I think people don't realize is, that bees can sting, and that concerns people, and especially if you're allergic. But bumblebees are actually not aggressive at all. The males, which come out sort of later in the year, can't sting at all. And the queens and female workers do have a stinger, but they only use it, literally you have to kind of grab them. I've been surveying for this species, surveying bumblebees for 4 years now. And I'm catching them in nets and transferring them to little vials to be able to look at them and stuff. And I've gotten stung once, and it was 100% my fault because I basically grabbed the bee in my hand through the net. The most that they will do is, you know, if you get too close, they'll do this like what I call their snake charmer thing. They fly in a zigzag in front of your face. They're just kind of checking you out and like wondering what you're doing and why you're in their space, and then they fly off. So you really have to mess with a nest or grab them for them to sting you. They're pretty cute and fuzzy. I hope you'll agree when we talk about them a little bit more later. They like flowers. We like flowers. It's a win-win. Like it's a partnership made in heaven. And then there's all these really cool available community science options. They're easy to document with photos and then get feedback on what kind of species they are. And of course, they're a pollinator. And I think pollinators are an easy sell to most people. They get why they're important to us. You know, you can draw links directly to, you know, particular vegetables or things that people like, chocolate, you know, coffee, why pollinators are important, and people get it. And then they have these small habitat needs. So you don't, talking to people in a city, you know, even someone with a small piece of land can make a difference. You know, you don't have to have like acres and acres and plant, you know, a 40-acre prairie to make a difference. You can do so in a small space, and that's, you know, makes people feel really good. Okay. So some of the things about a city. So first of all is mowing. And, you know, you can talk to your cities about reducing the amount of mowing on city grounds and residences. You know, they can do this by restoring prairie or other wildflowers on places that are currently lawn. They can relax city ordinances mandating lawn and mowing for their residents. They can have a no-mow May. This is a program that the Rusty Society has started that cities basically excuse people from having to mow their lawn during the month of May. And, you know, maybe there are people that aren't particularly comfortable with not mowing it at all, but they can, you know, mow it a little less than they usually do. Let it get a little taller. Let some of those weeds that happen in the lawn get a little bit bigger. And it's going to be much more helpful for the insect life in the city. Nectar is particularly important early in the season, especially for bumblebees. So, you know, having a weedy lawn, even if it's with non-natives like white clover and dandelions, are going to be pretty important for these species. And, you know, this is probably the hardest sell, quite frankly. Humans, you know, our relationship with lawn goes back hundreds of years. It's like deep in our DNA to really appreciate just a lovely cut lawn of grass. And not everybody you're not gonna win over everybody, but we need to start changing the culture slowly but surely to be okay with spaces that are a little more natural looking. Sure, you can still have some lawn, absolutely, but like, you know, do you need as much lawn as you do? So ways that an organization can help is through education, helping city leaders and citizens feel more comfy with a taller, weedier lawn. Consult on native landscaping. You know, how can you add some native plants, take some of that lawn and convert it into native landscaping in a way that, you know, still looks neat or still, you know, is within their comfort zone. And then helping cities, you know, with some fun ways to sell, like a no-mow May program or some other program that relaxes some of the ordinances that cities have about lawns and yards. Stormwater and dealing with those, you know, wet spots in town. So there's lots of natural ways of handling stormwater and ponding areas. There's a preponderance of information out there. There's a couple of great organizations in Iowa that, you know, have tons and tons of good information on this. So cities are already well aware of this, you know, and many of them support and encourage rain gardens, and also restore wetlands to more naturally handle some of the stormwater. But ways you can help is, provide expertise in some of the prairie planting, and maybe help with access to seed if there's a way to do that. Work with the county conservation board or your local county conservation board or the state DNR to host some volunteer seed harvests on public properties, and then donate that seed to cities to help enhance. Maybe they've got a natural wetland, but there's just not a lot of flowers in the planting, or it's a lot of non-native grass that's there. So how can you, enhance that area? This is speaking to the choir, I know. Just use native plants. And I really want to emphasize here that this doesn't need to be intimidating. This doesn't need to be like, you need to turn everything in your yard or on city properties to native plants immediately. Keep it simple. Even just replacing one non-native plant with a native plant will make a difference. And in some cases, I talked to one sort of a person who works with cities on some of these, especially water projects. But she was talking about if you go into an area of the city that's, already derelict or, has a lot of trash and is not in good shape, and you plant like a really diverse mix of prairie in spots, it still looks messy. It just makes the area look more unkempt and messier. So in areas like that, they've switched to just planting 1 or 2 species in, groups. It looks neater. It's still, introducing native plants into the area and making a difference. So of course, this group is very suited for providing education on native plants, especially those that are suited to an urban environment. Not every prairie plant is going to look great in an urban environment or do well in an urban environment. So what are those species, that are really good? Host a native plant sale, which y'all were just talking about doing. Help design and provide signs to label yards as pollinator friendly. So make people proud of this, as well as give them some ability to educate their neighbors, as well as like if, things are looking a little messier than maybe their neighbors like, the neighbors can see that it's for a reason and that they, that it's a good reason. And then, a lot of towns and cities have these, yard of the month contests, and it's usually like a very manicured lawn. Maybe you can work with local garden clubs or master gardeners to start a pollinator yard of the month, and recognize yards that are really doing great work for pollinators. And then finally, also working with city parks and rec. A lot of these, especially in smaller towns, are operating on a shoestring. So, so they do what they can with their budgets. But, if you have the expertise, providing them with some prairie woodland management, providing some guidance or assistance with those things, hosting volunteer work days in city parks. This is another place where you could donate native seed to help with things, and even provide programming. And then finally, to maybe think about to at least have a starting point is there's a number of programs out there that can be used to kind of provide some structuring guidelines to cities that are a little like unsure what to do. And all these programs basically provide like a list of things the city can check off to do so that they can be recognized as a bird-friendly city or a bee city or sign the mayor's monarch pledge. And you can not only talk to your city leaders about doing one of these things and adopting one of these things, which gives them some nice, metrics to meet and that they can sell to the citizens as, look what we're doing. Most people can get behind these things, but you can also, help host events, which is usually one of the items to meet these criteria, is to hold some kind of education event for citizens. And also, just provide guidance and support to the cities. And with that, so that's kind of the first part of this program, talking about cities, and I'd be happy to answer questions. And I'd also love to hear people's thoughts on and other ideas and barriers that you think there are? Is there, some really out of the box, interesting ways that we can help cities to start thinking of themselves as conservation spaces, and that they are a part of nature as well, and not just the, state parks and WMAs.
Yep.
Okay, Stephanie, thank you. This really isn't a question, but James McComb made an observation that the Rusty-patched Bumblebee aren't solitary when the slide of the nest on the foundation came up, and found that interesting.
So they are, so it is a solitary queen. But they build it, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the second half of the program. They do have colonies of workers and stuff, but it is a solitary queen. Yeah, it's somewhat similar to like a honeybee hive, except for they're not building a hive.
Okay, great, thank you. Marcy Ponder wondered what the traditional or historic range of the Rusty-patched Bumblebee is. Were they always this far west?
Yes, so Boone was in the historic distribution of the species. Probably the furthest west point in Iowa is actually up north, kind of the Spirit Lake area is where it was expected. And then it stretched, that's kind of the farthest west of the global distribution, and it stretched all the way to the East Coast. It is pretty much gone from most of the East Coast. That range has contracted about 80%. And so really the Midwest is kind of the stronghold for this species currently.
Okay. John Walter, I think, had just a concern. He said, don't we want to reduce mosquito habitat?
Yes, and so that is, I actually had a slide in here that I took out because it's just a little like a sort of adjacent to this about ways that cities can reduce mosquitoes naturally. A lot of cities spray for mosquitoes, and cities are no joke. I mean, mosquitoes are no joke. They, can pass disease and stuff like that. So, we may not be able to get rid of cities spraying for mosquitoes totally, but there's things that they can do, including education to landowners on how to, the vast majority source for mosquitoes is from, Bob's bucket that he left out when it rained, and there's a little bit of water in it. It's the more natural habitats like the wetlands for stormwater, usually have dragonflies and lots of other species that keep the mosquito populations to a lower level.
Okay, let's see. Kyle Harchie wondered if there are some threatened bees in Northwest Iowa.
So yes, American Bumblebee is one I'm going to be talking about, and it is currently petitioned for listing, and it's statewide in Iowa. Also, Rusty-patched Bumblebee does go, like I said, we haven't found any records of it in Northwest Iowa. We have searched up there, but it could potentially be in sort of the Spirit Lake area east.
Okay. I have a question. Does bringing in non-native honeybee boxes cause any problem to our native bumblebees?
So honeybees are a little bit of a concern with native bee populations. They can compete for nectar resources with native bees, and they also, because they're non-native, they can carry disease, and that is usually spread by the flowers they're visiting. So they can potentially pass disease to native species as well. So for example, like the DNR does not allow hives on natural areas and stuff like that. So it's generally, they can coexist for sure, but yes, honeybees are a little bit of a concern.
Okay. John Walter wondered if there are similar programs in Illinois.
Similar programs like the Bee City USA or Bird Friendly Iowa or something.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. So yeah, Bee City USA and Mayor's Monarch Pledge are national. Bird Friendly Iowa, I don't know that Illinois has one, but I think our program is modeled on a program from Wisconsin. So, you know, I think they're state-based programs, but there's potential that there could be a bird-friendly city program in Illinois. I'm not aware of one. But.
Okay. I think that's all. I hope I didn't miss any.
Okay. Great. So I'll go ahead and launch into the next part, which is talking about bumblebees as a whole and doing a little introduction to them and some basic ID. I don't expect you to come out of this, you know, knowing your bumblebees like an expert or anything like that, but hopefully it at least gives you some foundation to appreciate bumblebees and, you know, that you can grow on. So generally, bumblebees are relatively large in size when you're just thinking about recognizing them as a group. They have bulky, thick bodies with very little waist. They're very fuzzy and furry, and their predominant colors are black and yellow, though that some species have a little bit of red on them. They also, excuse me, are one of the only groups of species with a pollen basket. They share this with honeybees. Basically, the female workers and the queens have a modified back leg where they can pack pollen into a ball and store it on their leg. Most other, you know, honeybees and bumblebees have this pollen basket. Most other bees do move pollen around and collect pollen, but they do it just in hairs along their leg. Their legs are very hairy and they pick it up that way. So a year in the life of a bumblebee is basically the most important bumblebee out there is the queen bumblebee, because those are the only members of a colony that overwinter. So you have a queen that at the end of the year, sort of in the fall, late fall, is mated and then goes into hibernation for the winter. Usually they hibernate underground. So they're looking for like a rodent burrow or just going under the vegetation, usually in a wooded type area. Excuse me. And they are dormant for the winter time, and then in spring they come out, and they can come out very early. So in Iowa as early as April, and they're immediately looking for nectar. So probably at that time they're mostly looking at spring ephemerals or native shrubs and trees that flower, and they're using those for nectar and to gather pollen. They're also scouting out nest sites, which most of these are ground nesters. So they're looking for abandoned rodent burrows, or as I mentioned before, you know, a brush pile or a, you know, pile of concrete, or any place that has kind of little nook and cranny where they can build a little chamber. And they start building sort of chambers in their nest, and laying eggs in them out of pollen, and continuing to go out and gather stuff. Out of those chambers that they built, the female workers start to emerge in early summer. And once the colony gets to a certain density, the queen stays behind and just keeps laying eggs, where the female workers go out and continue to gather nectar and pollen. Towards the end of the summer, usually around August for a lot of species, you have a third type of bumblebee emerge, the male, and the male's only job is to basically scout for any virgin queens that are produced by the colony. And so they keep a lookout. Once they find a virgin queen, they mate with it, and the queen goes into hibernation and the cycle starts all over again. So pretty elaborate thing, and it sort of highlights how important those queen bumblebees are, because they are the only ones that carry over, you know, from the previous fall to the next spring. Some basic terminology about identifying bumblebees. If you ever took an entomology class, you probably remember that insects are divided into three segments: the head, thorax, and abdomen. They have antennae that are fairly long and that come out of their face. They have 3 pairs of legs for a total of 6 legs. You have the thorax and then the abdomen, which is divided into segments that are called tergites. And these are really important because from an ID perspective. So they're often labeled T1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as you go down. And excuse me, the color on those tergites and which tergites have color and which tergites are black are really important for identifying certain species. And then finally on the females, so the queen and the female workers, you have this modified back leg with the pollen basket, also known as a corbicula. So here's an example, sort of a comparison of a female bumblebee back leg and a male bumblebee back leg. So this is the same segment of that leg, and you can see on the female, it's kind of this spade or it's flattened out, and it's where they store pollen, whereas males don't have that. There are differences between male and female bumblebees that you can use to identify them. The male bumblebee has bigger eyes that take up more of the face, as well as longer antennae than the female, though you're not probably going to be able to see that. Both of those are to help. Remember, the male's main job is to keep a lookout for the virgin queens. So they have those extrasensory things, big eyes, longer antennae to be able to their job. Probably the most noticeable thing with most males is that they have a little mustache. They usually have this yellow fur on their face, which females do not have, that distinguishes them as males. And then of course they don't have a stinger, unlike the females, but you want to be pretty certain that it's a male before you grab one in your hand. It's your you don't want to make a mistake with that one. Okay, so there's a number of other insects that look a lot like bumblebees. So we want to, dismiss them first. So first of all, there's the flies that can look very bumblebee-esque. They're compact shape and hairy, sort of like the bumblebees. Their antennae tend to be shorter and, kind of fuzzy coming out of their face. They have really large eyes that take up almost their entire head, and they only have 1 pair of wings. So if we go back here, you can see there's 2 pairs of wings on each side for a bumblebee, whereas the fly only has 1 pair of wings. Wasps. So wasps are hairless, first of all. They usually have a very defined waist that you can see in between the thorax and the abdomen. And of course, you can see that back leg. It's just a straight back leg, no pollen basket, no widened spatula type area. Carpenter bees are a big one that confuses people. That are easy to confuse with bumblebees. They are large. They have this, fuzzy thorax that looks a lot like a bumblebee thorax, but and they're very large. But they have a really hairless, shiny black abdomen. So there's no hair on there, and they don't have a pollen basket. They also nest in wood, don't nest in the ground. So these are the bees that people sometimes have trouble with, nesting in some old rotten wood on their deck or their house, usually unpainted wood. And then finally, honeybees. They're a little less hairy. They kind of have more of an orange, to my mind, they have sort of an orangish, cover to them. They also have the pollen baskets, but they're much smaller, and they actually have hair on their eyes and are generally just have more of an orangish versus a yellow look to them. Okay, so getting into identifying bumblebees, we're mostly going to be talking about color patterns. between the thorax and the abdomen, mostly on the abdomen. As I said, there's about 15 total species that can be found in Iowa. We're only going to talk about the most common that you'll run into, and not get into all 15 of those. Okay, so probably the most abundant and common species that occurs statewide is Bombus impatiens, or the common eastern bumblebee. They come out in mid-spring. They're statewide in their distribution, and they're the only bumblebee that has basically that T1 that's yellow. So that very top first tergite or segment of the abdomen is yellow, and then the rest is black. Everybody else is going to have color on other tergites or other parts of their abdomen. Only the common eastern has just one. That first tergite, T1, is yellow and the rest is black. So it's pretty easy to identify and pretty easy to pick out. I should note that while bumblebees are large, they can vary a lot in size within species as well as even within a nest. So you can see some, common eastern bumblebees that are fairly large, and others that are actually, can be pretty small. So don't let size completely throw you off. But you're mostly looking for that T1 is yellow and the rest is black on the abdomen. Another really common species that's very abundant across the state is the brown-belted bumblebee, or Bombus graciicolis. It gets confused with Rusty-patched Bumblebee a lot because it's got kind of this, on T1 is yellow, that first segment is yellow, and then the second one is kind of got this half moon of brownish reddish fur. No yellow underneath, just a half moon of brownish yellow fur. And we'll see this guy again a little bit later, but they're very common, and you'll see them pretty regularly in lots of different habitats. The two-spotted bumblebee, this is a species that emerges very early and also kind of disappears early in the year. So you can see a lot of these early in the year, sort of May, June, first part of July, and then it kind of fades away and you won't see them too much anymore. They're sort of associated with woodlands, so they're going to occur in areas with lots of trees. And you can see why it's called the two-spotted. The T1 is yellow, and then T2, or the second segment, has two little humps, or two little spots, if you will, that are very distinct. And again, it's not like anything else. It doesn't extend across the entire tergite. It's just in the center, two little spots. The next one is probably the biggest bumblebee we have in Iowa, and this is the black and gold bumblebee, or Bombus oricomis. So the queens of this species are so huge, I can't even express to you. So if you've ever been buzzed by like a bumblebee that you felt like was the size of your head, it was probably a black and gold bumblebee. It is also very common to another species of bumblebee, which we'll talk about in a second. But to get to know the black and gold bumblebee, the key points for identifying it are that on the thorax, it's going to have yellow, it kind of has a black central space, but it's going to have yellow both above that and below that on the thorax. Then the T1 is black, and then T2 and T3 is yellow. And these are really bright and very, they kind of look very distinct from each other. So it's a really attractive and striking bumblebee. And you'll notice with this one, hopefully you can see T1 is black, and that black sort of bleeds down in to the T2. So it's kind of like the black it's very clearly black, and it's kind of bleeding down into the T2. That's gonna important for the next bumblebee we talk about, which is the American bumblebee, or Bombus pennsylvanicus. So I mentioned that this species is one that has been petitioned for federal listing. It's of conservation concern. It emerges a little bit later in spring, and as you can see, it looks a lot like the black and gold. They can also be quite large. The differences are, oops, sorry, the American bumblebee does not generally have yellow on the thorax. It doesn't have yellow underneath sort of the black central space. So it's basically yellow above, black central space, and then it's, you know, black underneath as well. And then the T1, it may have a little bit of yellow on it. It's mostly black. It has a little bit of yellow. And then the T2 and T3 are yellow as well. And basically for this one, so we talked about the black and gold bumblebee, the black in the first T1 sort of bleeds down into T2. Well, in this, for this species, the yellow on T2 bleeds up a little bit into T1. So it's a very subtle difference. And this is definitely a species that some of them, it's real clear if you're looking at a black and gold versus an American, and some of them it can be tricky. So getting good pictures of the species is important. And this kind of illustrates this, these two illustrations. So with Bombus pennsylvanicus, or the American bumblebee, you've got the no yellow underneath sort of the black central space on the thorax. It's yellow on T2 and T3, and the yellow kind of bleeds up just a little bit onto T1. Whereas with the Oricomis, or black and gold bumblebee, you have yellow both above and below the black central space on the thorax. And then you've got a black T1, and that maybe bleeds down just a little bit into a yellow T2 and T3. Okay, so the half black bumblebee, Bombus vagans, this isn't quite as common as the others we've been talking about, mostly because it's kind of, it spends a lot more time near forested habitat than the other species. It likes to, you know, hang out on those forest edges and forages a lot in shade. It's called the half black bumblebee because it's got, you know, pretty much an almost completely yellow thorax, and then the T1 and T2 are yellow, and then the rest is black. So if you take the species as a whole, like you can see over here on the right, you know, it looks half yellow and half black. So hence its name. It's also very, very fuzzy and sort of unkempt looking. It looks like it just woke up in the morning and didn't brush its hair or anything. It looks very, you know, unkempt. And that's very typical of this species. It's also a smaller bumblebee, so it tends to be on the small side. Okay, so last bumblebee we're going to talk about is the Rusty-patched Bumblebee. So if you're over in the Loess Hills, the Rusty-patch is likely not over there. But just for everybody else, just to give you a general idea of what you're looking for, is the Rusty-patch is, it's basically, the thorax is yellow above and below, and then it's got kind of this uniquely shaped black central spot. So it's got kind of a black spot with an arrow pointing down towards the abdomen. I'll show an illustration that kind of shows it a little more in detail. And then the T1 is yellow, and then the T2 has kind of a little bit of red, a little half moon or a little couple spots of red, and then it's got yellow underneath it. So that's really crucial for identifying the species, is you need yellow, red, and yellow on the abdomen. That's really important. And you're only talking about color on the T1 and T2, or those first two segments on the abdomen. Sometimes that red isn't really, it can be hard to see and stuff like that, but you really have to have yellow, red, yellow. I call it the jelly sandwich. So you want a piece of bread, some jelly, and then another piece of bread. And that's really the crucial thing that, you know, distinguishes it from, say, the brown-belted bumblebee, which I'll show in a little bit. But these are the three sort of groups of the Rusty-patched Bumblebee. The queen, which actually looks quite different and does not have any red, so that's fun. They can be actually very hard to identify, but they're one of the earlier species to emerge in the spring. And then this is that weird shape. on the thorax, which is pretty unique to the species. And then you've got yellow, a little bit of a red half moon, and then yellow. And these are kind of its biggest lookalikes. As we mentioned, I mentioned the brown belted. See that the brown belted has yellow, and then it has its little brown. This can sometimes look red belt, but then it doesn't have any yellow underneath. So that's the really big difference with the rusty patch. And then also the, this is a half black, can also look similar in that because it's got yellow, and then it's got usually these dark little patches here and then yellow. It can have, and that can be confusing because you think, you know, maybe, but look how much fuzzier this guy is and how he kind of looks unkempt and stuff. So, but can sometimes throw you for a loop. Okay, so that's kind of an introduction to some of the, you know, really basic common species in the state and the bumblebees, and some of the things to use for identification. Your camera and phone is going to be your biggest you know, asset in identifying things. There's a lot of programs you can use that do a pretty good job with identifying bumblebees, including iNaturalist. Binoculars is pretty helpful, and then also some field ID books or apps, and I'll mention a couple here in a second. Taking photos, you want to get as close as possible. Remember, they're generally not aggressive and the bees cannot sting. So honestly, especially if they're really focused on nectaring, they'll let you get pretty close to them to get a good shot. For the camera, you want to have a decent camera or your phone that has a macro setting on it so you can get pretty close, and you want it on autofocus. And if the bumblebee is moving around too much, maybe record a video rather than a photo is easier for ID purposes. And then if you're out and you're looking for bumblebees and you're looking at a lot of different individuals, taking a spacer photo of the ground or a particular flower can help tell you, okay, you know, I took pictures of this one individual and now I've moved to another one. So if you can, at all possible, for perfect ID, you really want to get a picture of the dorsal side or the back side of the bumblebee, from the side, or a profile of the bumblebee, and then also a straight on head view if you can. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or many other places, but there's also Bumblebee Watch where you can post photos and they are vetted by experts. iNaturalist has a pretty good AI that does a good job of identifying them. And then some other things we have in Iowa, we have this very nice Bumblebees of Iowa that the Sioux Society put together. You can download this off their website pretty easily. Just search for Bumblebees of Iowa and Sioux Society and it should come up. And then these are two, this book on the left, Bumblebees of North America, is probably the best sort of ID guide for North American bumblebees that's out there. So if you're really serious about it, that's a good one to get to. And then Heather Holm has a couple of really nice books about native plants and the bees that pollinate them, and you know, I think would especially appeal to this group. So her name is Heather Holm, and you can look up her website, and she's got a couple of nice books that sort of make that connection between the plant and the pollinator. And with that, that's all I have to say. I hope I didn't go too long. I get really excited and talk a lot, but I'm happy to take any questions, or if anybody has any suggestions or discussion or anything like that. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you so much. And that you certainly didn't go too long. We could have listened a lot longer. I'm not sure whether I should just let people ask their own questions now, or if I should run through some of them that were in the chat. Any ideas there, Ruth or Dawn?
I'd say go through the chat questions first.
Okay. Melissa Decker really didn't have a question, but she shared that the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade is another cool group.
Yes. Yeah, and We're actually working right now on a grant to start a Midwest Bumblebee Atlas, which would be similar to the Wisconsin Bumblebee Brigade. Minnesota has one already in place. Actually, I think Nebraska and Missouri both have it in place, but Iowa does not. And we would, if we got this grant money, we would start one. So that's a volunteer-based Bumblebee survey program, if folks, think that is interesting.
Oh yeah, that sounds great. Ruth and Dawn asked if each queen only lives 1 year.
Yes, so the queen only, yes, they don't have colonies across years. So they die at the end of the nesting season.
Okay. Jane McAmer Grillo said, do bees have jointed antennas versus those of non-bees?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think you're right that is a common thing. Certainly you can help identify like those males to females based on the number of segments they have in their antennae, whether it's 7 to 9 versus 9 to 11. But I'm not sure about other bees, but it may be a good identifier between bees and non-bees.
And you may have answered this already for Amanda Angle. She wondered about the color of the thorax, that she's seen some with very large black spots and some with small spots.
Yeah, and it can make a difference. There are some species where it is important for, none of the ones I mentioned except for Rusty-patch is it super important, although we did talk about the black and gold and American. They have kind of a difference in the pattern on the thorax. There's also Bombus fraternus, which is the Southern Plains bumblebee, which is not as common. It's not a very common species, but it also has, a very distinctive pattern on the thorax. But you also have to be careful because as the bumblebee gets older, the individual gets older, sometimes the fur wears off, and that pattern on the thorax can, that black spot can look bigger and that kind of thing.
Okay. Let's see, we have one from Tim Millard wonders if you know which is best, the best low growing clover for nature, somewhere along the Missouri River, Bellevue, Nebraska, actually.
Oh, so I don't, certainly bumblebees love purple prairie clover or white prairie clover. The dahlias they definitely love those too. And actually they have I was doing a survey in a field that had a lot of it, and the bumblebees that were using it had like these bright orange pollen balls on there. It made really beautiful pollen if you can kind of envision what those prairie clovers look like. They have a bright orange pollen, so it's kind of striking. But those are the two best native clovers that I'm aware of. But of course, bumblebees will use some of the non-native clovers. They love those as well, the white and red clover, as well as sweet clover, which I would not recommend planting, but they do like it.
Jason Anderson asked that when you spoke to the city administrators, was there a theme of specific barriers to implementing native plantings or pollinator habitats?
Yeah, so a lot of them had, and I would need to think about this a little bit, and I can reach out to you, Jason, about this, but there's pushback from citizens who don't like messy looking areas. There was some of that, but then there was also, so when I talked about maybe relaxing some of the ordinances, they were like, I mean, we'd love to do that, but if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile kind of thing. There are certain things they have to, or they feel like they really need to, they can't let it get too wild, I guess, is in their minds. And, they were afraid if they relaxed some ordinances, or maybe even had experiences where relaxing some ordinances, people took advantage of that. So.
I wonder if we shouldn't open it up now because we keep getting new messages or questions coming in. So maybe that's a sign that we should open things up.
Sure. If anybody has a question that they would like to ask live, if you could raise your hand, I think I need to change my view here. Raise your hand and we'll get to you.
I'm also, I can look in, some of the chat as well. So, like one question was the Carpenter Bees versus Bumblebees, which I think I talked about that early on, but like the Carpenter Bees have kind of their abdomen is mostly hairless and it's kind of a shiny black. But otherwise they're similar size to a bumblebee. They're also, if they're going in and out of wood, then it's a Carpenter Bee versus a Bumblebee is going to be in some kind of like taking advantage of some hole or in the ground. And then another question was, are bumblebees plant specific? So they're not necessarily plant specific, but one of the reasons why bees in general are such good pollinators is that they exhibit sort of nectar fidelity during a particular trip out. So if an individual goes out and starts collecting pollen and nectar off of purple prairie clovers, it will continue to just visit purple prairie clovers on that visit. So it's moving between the same, species and, taking it back to the so it makes it's part of what makes bumblebees and bees in general really good pollinators is that they sort of zero in on something that's very abundant. Certainly for bumblebee habitat, planting things in sort of big swaths of the same species is going to be like they're going to like that a lot, is having like a lot of a particular species and then that's all blooming at one time.
John, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, just going back to that. In your presentation, you talked about the habitat, and it seems like the habitat that's good for bumblebees is also good for vermin. And my cousin would not like bumblebees. He rode his bicycle into one and his face swelled so much that he couldn't see for about 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
that make it hard to sell a bumblebee thing to people that have those sort of anecdotal stories.
Yeah, and you certainly are not going to get everybody on board, in any kind of community. But I think people, and so maybe from that perspective, you can go to the flowers and the plants and people who like to garden, because there's a lot of really beautiful native plants out there with beautiful flowers, and people love flowers, and so indicating that they like flowers. Another thing you can talk about is if they're not crazy about insects but they like birds, birds need those insects as food. So, talking about providing habitat for insects also provides really important habitat for birds. And, if you're doing that, for both, they can hopefully, the birds can kind of keep those insects in check. And, I'm sorry to hear about your cousin, but that is kind of
that was back in the 30s, back in the 60s, but I just wanted to say that.
I'm sure it was traumatizing.
I just wanted to, bring that up. I'm thinking that buffer areas may be a good place for some of this planting to go inside there because it's not as close to near people. So they wouldn't have to worry about, oh my goodness, I can't tell a wood bee from a bumblebee from a sweat bee, but they can still have the plants in there for that because bees go everywhere. They're almost as if, easy to find as mud daubers.
Yeah, well, and I think, certainly encouraging cities to do work on their own properties, particularly the parks. But, outside of, like, for example, Boone has a city park that's quite huge. And so there's lots of places in that park that don't have a lot of usage by people. It's not right by the playground or the skate park or whatever, where they could definitely have, wilder habitat that many people would enjoy.
Well, I think so. I think that also would cut down on some of the initial resistance for having their own yards and neighborhoods inside and say, oh, it's not as scary as I thought it was. I thought we were going to be leaving we had a big controversy many years ago here about Queen Anne's lace.
Yeah.
Whether or not you could have Queen Anne's lace in your yard or whether that was a weed that needed to be cut down because it was too tall,
Yeah.
too tall for the mowing thing. I'm thinking, okay, we got all these native species, native plants that are taller. How do we get people to put tall plants in their yard?
We have another question from Sarah Stussy here in Sioux City. Stephanie, are there any Iowa communities, cities, or counties that stand out in leading the charge with pollinator-friendly practices?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily, I wish I knew more about what all cities were doing, but two that stand out to me are Davenport, Iowa. If you go on their city website, they have all sorts of programs that encourage, they have a lot of practices that the city itself does, but they also have a lot of programs for citizens to, or residents to do, that encourage them to do native plants and friendly, pollinator friendly type stuff. And then Cedar Rapids actually has a particular organization that sort of really got the city fired up around a lot of the monarch conservation issues, monarch butterfly conservation issues. And so there's been Lynn County in general has had a lot of really good work done in those cities. And there's probably several others, but those are two that come directly to mind.
That's great. Well, we want to thank you once again, Stephanie, for sharing such a great presentation. I'm feeling more confident about my Bumblebee ID. I should know these by now, but it's just one of those things that you did a great job presenting. And I appreciate everybody joining us today. Thanks for coming on our Loess Hills Wild Ones. Any other closing comments, Ruth?
I think I'm just thrilled to have you here, Stephanie, and it just went incredibly well. And I am fascinated by your photography. I did have one question about your graphics, like you had some of the mixed. Are you doing those? Is that your artwork?
No, actually, I think this is a template, a PowerPoint template that I tracked down. So yeah, no, I'm not an artist at all. Yeah.
Absolutely stunning. Greatly appreciated.
Yeah. I forgot to mention in your introduction that you're a Rusty-patched Bumblebee magnet. Says I remember your story when you found that one in your yard, and it was just so.
I'm not the last.
So amazing.
Yeah, the last 3 years I've been doing surveys like in Northwest Iowa, and I haven't found a single one. So it was that was the fluky one. So.
But right in your backyard. So you never know what's literally in your backyard. So keep on looking, keep on striving, and everybody have a wonderful day.
For sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.